So there were blistering closing arguments today in the Karen Read trial from both sides. The government, who insists that Karen Read plowed into her boyfriend while drunk, and by Los Angeles's own Alan Jackson, who both of whom delivered closing arguments. I would love to hear, what are your thoughts?
Well, Alexandra Kazarian here, attorney with G&G. Hi, Kim.
Hey.
Another attorney from our office. We both specialize in criminal defense. Kim, you go first.
About the defense's closing or the prosecution's?
Well, it was a very busy morning, and I wanted to turn to both of you because you're such experts in this field. First, let's start with LA's own Alan Jackson. Kimberly, how did you think that he delivered his closing arguments for his client?
I think he did amazing. I think he really drove it home, and the way he outlined and told the story and ran the jurors through the entire thing, it just flowed. It just made so much sense compared to the prosecutions. It was very scattered. It was very here, there, different theories and concepts that I think they were just trying to string together. And yeah, so
that's such a huge issue too, because a lot of times if you can tie the jury to a cohesive story, and if your side is the hero of that story and that story makes more sense, then the jury is much more likely to go with it. So in opening and closing, if you can give them a compelling tale that they can tie their emotions to, and it makes sense, sometimes the facts don't even matter. And here, I think you've got the facts, and Alan Jackson's got that story. So,
and the story was laid out in a very concise and I think detailed way. His argument is that Karen Read is the victim of police corruption. He pointed to the many, many missteps that we all saw unravel on the stand in two of Karen Read's trials, the most important being the investigation itself and the lead investigator, Michael Proctor, who has been fired by the Mass State Police. It struck me that one of the most compelling arguments that Alan Jackson made was, if the Massachusetts State Police cannot trust its lead investigator, Michael Proctor, how can the jury trust anything that he touched in this case? And Jackson pointed out to the jurors, that means everything. Proctor touched everything.
Everything. It colors every single aspect of this case. And if they can, that's exactly it. I think that is, you cannot beat that closing argument, that portion of the closing argument. If they can't trust him, how can you? And they're assuming that he's doing what he's supposed to be doing. They're kind of advocating for him until they can't anymore. And here, as a juror, you're supposed to be looking at this critically. You're not supposed to be coming at it. You're actually improper if you're coming into this case thinking, I'm sure Michael Proctor's doing everything right, but let me look at the evidence. That's not the way to come at it. As a juror, you have to look at it with the completely neutral eyes. I don't know that Michael Proctor's a good person. And actually what I tell jurors all the time is that I need you to assume that Karen Read did not do it. I need you to come from a place where you assume that she's a good person that didn't do this. And then if the prosecution brings you down to a point where there's no other way that this could have happened except for she did it, then maybe you can convict. And here, the balance is so out of whack already. There's no way that Michael Proctor can attack the assumption of innocence.
Kimberly, I was surprised when Hank Brennan, in his own statement, referred to Proctor, this trooper that is really at the center of the very messy investigation, as the boogeyman Proctor. What was your reaction to that? I was surprised that he would throw that out there. And we do need to point out that Hank Brennan was hired by the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office as a special prosecutor to the tune of $250,000 that will be paid by the taxpayer. So that struck me as odd, but I'm not a defense attorney. How did that strike you?
I think it was just another example of Brennan. A lot of the time in his cross-examinations, he was kind of just projecting what the prosecution's witnesses were doing when he was cross-examining the defense's witnesses. So with him calling out Proctor, it just makes you question and think, and I think it puts those bad concepts into the jurors' heads. I think in another cross-exam that Brennan was doing, he brought up like a conspiracy and like planting evidence. It's like, why would you yourself bring that up when the defense isn't even bringing that up in the exam and the cross-exam? You're just planting these things in the jurors' heads. But going back to Alex's point about with jurors and trying to get it in their head that you have to start with that Karen Reed did not do it or that she's not guilty, and then look at all the facts and evidence in a non-biased way. I think going into those little small towns where it's cop towns, everybody in the jury pool has a relative or a close family member or friend that is a cop. And so I thought it was very interesting between the first trial and their perspective in this second trial, going with the police's failure to conduct those investigations, because they had to kind of put it squarely in the jurors' faces that, you know, I understand you hold these cops to the highest, utmost respect, and you think the best of them. You think they're going to do the best investigation and make sure it's, you know, tied up in a bow, perfect, when especially it's a cop who's dead on another cop's lawn. So I think the entire second trial of, in closing, showing the jurors all of these things went wrong. These cops, they might be great people. They messed up. You should not hold this person's life guilty of murder in this case. And the hundreds of thousands of dollars, I just thought it was crazy. The hundreds of thousands of dollars you're seeing for an expert doing finger painting, basically, and to get a special prosecutor for a murder case. Alex, who does that?
Yeah, it's there are all signs that the prosecution is in trouble. And it shouldn't be. They should not be in trouble when you've got a dead body on a lawn and you have tons of witnesses inside of the house. This should not have been a hard case for the prosecution.
I just think it was such I just think for a second trial and using tax dollars, the people's tax dollars, to put this on, they should have came up with a lot better than their entire closing. All they did was play videos of Karen Reed. The rest of their entire initial case that they put on was just trying to prove that their own witnesses didn't commit anything, didn't have any wrongdoing. That was the entire case. That was what I thought of his whole closing.
Alan Jackson laid out an alternative theory in his closing arguments today that Brian Higgins, the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms agent, the ATF agent, who was friends with the homeowner, Brian Albert, he had been texting with Karen Reed. He had shared some sort of romantic liaison with Karen Reed. And this is in the weeks leading up to John O'Keefe's death. And, you know, the video, when taken into the context that Brian Higgins had texted Karen when she walked into that bar with John O'Keefe and said, well, and then within 5 minutes of Reed's arrival with a then alive John O'Keefe at Fairview Road in Canton, there was another text. This time Higgins sent it to O'Keefe, "You coming here?" So that to me was very compelling, I think. How do you think the jurors took this idea that here's this whole other guy who had a motive, then he is spotted on some videos, you know, squaring off, play fighting, and gesturing for John O'Keefe to come outside?
It's wild. You know, Alan Jackson is great at what he does. And explaining to the jury that it's not for you to pick which version you think is the truth. When there's circumstantial evidence involved in a case, all you need to do is ask yourself, is there a reasonable alternative that points to innocence? Is it reasonable to believe that this might have happened? And if it's reasonable to believe it, then you cannot convict. And that's what a jury needs to be told. That's what a jury was explained. And when that happens, it is unjust for you to find somebody guilty. And I think it's rare for a retrial to be worse for the prosecution. Usually they understand what their faults were and their case gets much stronger and they tie up all the loose ends. And I just think that this one actually got worse for the prosecution, and it's shocking to me.
To go back to Kimberly's point about the videos, it seemed to me that the most damage that was done to the defense's case were those videos of Karen Reed making these somewhat alarming statements. Maybe I hit him. Maybe I clipped him. I was definitely drinking. And Hank Brennan ended his closing by reiterating a statement she had made in one of her interviews, and that is like a buffalo on a prairie, which, prompted John O'Keefe's mom to begin crying. And that was a statement that he had repeated from one of her interviews. Do you guys see this as a mistake to allow her to give these media interviews before the second trial?
It probably wasn't the best, but I think that they did put on a good expert who testified and cleared that up. And I think they definitely cherry picked that part of her statement. She was saying at the scene when she spoke those words, did I hit him? Could I have hit him? That was in her mind at the present time, while she still probably had alcohol in her system, while there's ambulances and cops and her boyfriend's found dead on the lawn. Anybody would be saying that. That's what she was saying. She was saying in that present moment when she found John. So the fact that they're saying she's now admitting it and saying it and still confirming it and acknowledging it, it's contradicted. And they put on the evidence, or they put on the expert who cleared that up and said a lot of people say or think or do things when they're, in that sudden panic and shock. So and I think especially in a criminal case where the defendant, I think that's totally the game day call if you're going to put on, which you typically don't, the defendant to testify. It kind of gave her, I think I don't know, the way you can take it is she was very candid in her entire interview, very candid. If there's bad things in there, she candidly said it all. It wasn't a polished, scripted, manufactured interview. So I think you could take it either way, and I think they cleaned it up with the expert.
You're damned if you do.
Pointing out that expert is from Los Angeles as well. She is a medical professor at the University of Southern California's Keck School of Medicine. She was a former Malden, Massachusetts police officer. I think she talked a little bit about trauma, and sometimes people respond to trauma by blurting out statements. And, to your point, Kimberly, I think that she did make some clarifying statements to clear that up. Alex, how did you take that?
I don't think it's a confession by any means. You have no idea where. I think it absolutely it aligns with somebody who doesn't know where their spouse or significant other is, where they're looking for them. They're going through all of the emotions. You're angry, you're pissed off, you're scared, you're jealous, you're going through every single emotion because you don't know what's happening. You're in the blind, and then you go there and you think, oh my God, is this a possibility? Did I hit him? I don't know. We would object to foundation if she was testifying to that. If she got on the stand and said, I hit him, I would object. You don't have the foundation for that. You don't know that you actually hit him. Could it be a possibility? Sure. I mean, that's why we're here. That it could be one of the things that might have happened. But from that point on, when you get into the investigation of what his body looked like, what his internal organs looked like, he didn't die in the cold. His internal organs were not frozen. Did we lose
Michele?
We lost our interviewer.
She's like, okay, fine. You guys got it.
Yeah, you guys take it from here.
But I agree. It's a statement from a person in real time during the emergency as she found him versus all of the science, all of the data, no broken bones, no anything.
Yeah, and if you don't know what happened to him and you get there and you see his body on the floor, I mean, it would be weird for her to be like, who killed him? Like,
if I woke up hungover and say that I hit him, like what?
Yeah, I mean,
what
it
happened?
Completely makes sense. Oh my God, I dropped him off here and then I drove away in a blizzard. Holy shit, did I hit him? Oh my God, I hit him.
Well, and I think so. Brennan, during closing, Brennan, when he was, honestly, I took it as just serious gaslighting. I just took it as it was a lot. But for him to say,
I think at that point, that's all they have left to do.
But for him to say Karen Reed, she didn't, one of the things was she didn't call the cops. She didn't knock on doors for help, to ask help. It's like, the woman who was sitting there, Jen McCabe, knowing her sister is inside a house where some guy is dead on a lawn. If that were me and I knew my sister was in a house where the guy is dead on a lawn, I'd be breaking through the door. If I didn't hear the dog barking, I'd be jumping through the window. The fact that Brennan is saying that, oh, Karen Reed clearly murdered John O'Keefe because she didn't go knock on the house door for help, when somebody whose sister was in there didn't even go knock on the door and ask for help, for somebody who is able to render aid in there. It was just a lot to process.
And nobody from the house came outside during the investigation. Like, could you?
Who's trained to render aid? Exactly.
Yeah. Can you act any stranger? I don't think so. I think the fact that they have held on to Karen Reed as the only suspect in this case and literally have not even thought about looking at anybody else is the biggest tell in this case. I mean, you cannot have proof beyond a reasonable doubt with such a one-sided investigation. And I actually really do hope that the jury sees that.
It struck me that the FBI was brought up multiple times in this trial, not by name, because the Superior Court Judge, Beverly Cannoni, had ruled that you couldn't mention the FBI, but the FBI had interviewed multiple people in this case. And we had Jen McCabe, who admitted that she lied to the FBI. And you had the rookie Boston police officer, Kelly Dever, who said that she had told the FBI initially that she saw Brian Higgins, that ATF agent, and the now late police chief of Canton Police Department, Ken Berkowitz, in the Sally Port where Reed's testimony, to me, one of the most devastating pieces of testimony came from the Dighton police officer, the sergeant, who Barros, who said, look, I was there. I saw Reed's car. The taillight had a little crack. Now I'm looking at photos from after it was, towed to the Canton Sally Port where it's completely smashed out. That actually, I think, created a gasp in the courtroom because you had somebody who said, look, it looked like this and then it looked like that. And that, I think, was a very damning piece of evidence. And he seemed to be the only one who didn't have some sort of liabilities that was associated with this case.
And I'm sorry, I think Kelly Dever is just going to go down as Miss False Memory. For someone to say, I witnessed something in my work in the dead of night on a video, it was weird enough to me to write it down, to say it was a weirdly long amount of time. And then after I get called into my boss's office, which no other underling has been called in when she's testified in over a dozen cases, she said. And then now she has a false memory and that it just is physically, anatomical, just everything impossible to have that.
Her testimony was my favorite part. I'm sorry. Anytime I'm having like a bad day, I'm just going to go back and watch her testimony. She's such a character.
Just like, you can't pronounce my name. I don't recall.
The best.
Like,
well, as a Bostonian, I'm very familiar with the Kelly Devers of our community.
Truly, it's the worst. It's terrible that this is a murder trial and she's acting like that. But just in the entertainment that is life, it's it's just crazy. It's just totally crazy.
I was
diving. I think the bigger point is that I don't believe the FBI is done with this investigation because we remember that there are, I've done a lot of reporting on the Sandra Birchmore case that has some very dramatic overlaps with the Karen Reed trial. Many of the same investigators who were called out for missteps in their investigation in the Karen Reed case were also involved in Sandra Birchmore. And just quickly, Sandra Birchmore her body was found in a blizzard exactly almost to the day 1 year before John O'Keefe's body was found. Within hours, they had called her family and said that she had committed suicide without any sort of medical examiner confirming that, without any real investigation. Fast forward nearly 4 years later, and we have a Stoughton police detective, by then disgraced and outed as having groomed this young woman named Sandra Birchmore. He was accused of being the father of her child. DNA, as yesterday, confirmed that he was not the father of Sandra Birchmore's child. But nonetheless, it took the FBI, not the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office, to arrest Matthew Farwell and to discover and uncover the overwhelming evidence that puts him at the scene of the crime and gives him motive to kill her. The FBI lays out a case where he was the last person to see her alive. He shows up at her home with a COVID mask and a hoodie. He was vehemently anti-vax at the time as a police union official for mass cops. And her phone stopped working immediately after he left. He drove from that, what the FBI now describes as a murder scene, and then went to a hospital where his wife was delivering their third child, wearing the same clothes that he was wearing in the footage that was captured at Birchmore's home. I think the FBI has a lot of questions for the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office about how that case was conducted. And we know that they were all over the South Shore of Massachusetts talking to the witnesses in the Karen Reed case. As defense attorneys, do you feel that the FBI's case is still ongoing into what exactly happened in this case?
I hope so. I mean, I think, I don't know if a conviction in this case will present a cooling effect on the FBI. If a jury does find her guilty, are they going to keep pushing for answers? I would hope so. But I think the two of these cases together definitely would motivate the FBI to try to figure out what's going on in the county in general. Because don't forget, you mentioned that Birchmore was grooming her, but grooming her since she was 15. She was a cadet, and the people that were supposed to bring her up right, help bring her up right, and to protect her and to teach her to serve the community were the ones that attacked her basically and groomed her. And he wasn't the only police officer that is alleged to have had relations with her. So
You
I
would
think
be horrified, Alex, at the new allegations that are emerging about the people who were involved in attacking, as you said, Sandra Birchmore. She was a 12-year-old girl when she first started to hang around with these cops in the Stoughton Police Explorers program. As you mentioned, it's a cadet program. And it's horrifying. Her U.S. Army recruiter, the animal control officer, at least 3 police officers have all been publicly accused of taking advantage of this young woman. And then when she's found dead, her family, her very Catholic family, I might add, was told that she committed suicide. But Kimberly, there's another case that has direct ties to Los Angeles that is out of the same Norfolk County DEA's office. And as a matter of fact, Michael Proctor was the lead investigator in that case. And that is the disappearance of Anna Walsh. Also on New Year's Day, right around the same time, she vanished from her home in Massachusetts, and her husband is now charged with mutilating her body, getting rid of the body, which they don't have. But Proctor is the lead investigator. They don't have a body. What do you think is going to happen in this particular case? And the tie to LA was that he had ripped off an art gallery owner in West Hollywood, the owner of the Warhol Gallery, Revolver, by selling him a bunch of fake paintings, which is how this entire financial mess created that made him allegedly kill his wife.
I just want to know how many defense attorneys are waiting until this trial finishes to reopen all of their cases with all of this perjury and all of this police misconduct that's going on. That's the only thing I can think about here.
I just don't know how you proceed on a second trial knowing that your lead investigator is under investigation himself. Like, you know what? I understand that no prosecutor's office wants to give up on a murder, but I don't understand how you prosecute this woman knowing that the entire investigation that you're leaning on is tainted like that. That's not justice.
And how is your main expert that you hire doing finger painting for $400,000 at least? It
was very damaging to their case that expert also had fudged his credentials.
Right.
And which again, Hank Brennan brought up himself. That was another alarming part of the closing today. It's like, yeah, he lied about his credentials.
He said he didn't update his credentials. He didn't even say that he lied. He's like, oh, a guy who just didn't update his CV. And it's like, no, he lied about it. He made up an entire bachelor degree.
Yeah, there's so many things for the jury to hang their hat on, but which is why I think it's so important for Alan Jackson to have a theme throughout his closing that kind of simplifies it. And, the idea that there was no collision, there just was no collision, that I think that theme was genius because that calls into question every single other aspect of the prosecution's case. If there was no collision, then, obviously Karen Read wasn't responsible. Karen Read wasn't responsible not only for leaving him there, but for the injuries. Where did the injuries come from if there was no collision? That little theme, as small as it is perfect because it encompasses all of the problems with the prosecution's evidence.
How long is the jury going to be deliberating? What are your predictions in closing?
I think they have to make it look like they're actually thinking about it. So even if they've come to the decision already that like this is wild, they have to at least go through the motions. So I think they'll be out. Today's Friday. I mean, Mark, our patron saint, Mark Garagos, always talks about his dad, who was our patron saint, always talked about how juries love a Friday afternoon verdict. So, I mean, it's 2:00 in LA. So
It's
we're
5
past
o'clock
the
there. They have about 30 minutes because the judge asked them to stay until 5:30 today. So there's about 30 minutes left in Boston time to see whether or not the jury's coming back today. But I'm with you, Alex. I think they at least have to make it look good through Monday.
Well,
I think they've got to make it look good through Monday. And if they don't come back by Wednesday, I'm calling a Friday afternoon verdict next Friday.
well, so I heard the judge, she chose the foreperson, and it was the one juror that apparently wasn't taking notes the entire time that everybody was suspicious of. The one person, 0 notebooks. Apparently one juror went through like 5 different notebooks this entire time. So it's a lot there. But I also was wondering, I didn't actually check I heard the defense asked to have a DUI charge put on as one of the options. Do you guys know?
It was added.
Just in case they want to find her guilty of something.
Yeah, that's smart.
Why not? Yeah. So
Alan Jackson pointed out today, though, that Brian Higgins had driven that same night.
all of them admitted to driving drunk, and it's just a crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. It's
I'd love to
totally
know
wild.
where Brian Higgins is today. It's funny because Brian Higgins, I had written a story about him years ago because he was involved in this wild shootout in Somerville, Massachusetts, as part of a task force, a gun task force, and he had saved a Somerville police officer's life. What a fall from grace.
Yeah, but cops are definitely held at a different standard when you're in a cop town. So they can, drive drunk because they have really stressful lives during the day and they need it at the end of the day. What are they supposed to do? Not drink? Come on. What does she have to drink about? Right? She's got this perfect life. What does she need to drink and drive about? So it's an uphill battle for the defense.
It really is. And I think Alan and the entire team did a crazy job when you know that even the judge is going against you. I pulled that because I just thought it was interesting. I've been watching all the stats on TikTok, and somebody tallied just for one day, the prosecution had 31 objections and 29 of them were sustained. Whereas the defense on that day, 46 objections, 16 sustained. So it was a 94% to a 35% from the judge. And then there was another one where if the defense did object or if the prosecution objected, then the judge would ask, well, can you answer that in a more helpful way to the prosecution every single time? And the defense, she obviously didn't.
There's a lot of
sometimes
days for government officials in Norfolk County, and that includes the judges. Because as you pointed out, every one of these cases that have been tried by this team of investigators from the Mass State Police, the CPAC unit, they call it, that work directly for the Norfolk County DA, I'm sure there are defense attorneys all over the Commonwealth that are salivating to start digging into these cases. And if this is an acquittal, it's not, they're going to be digging deep into the entire Norfolk County DA justice system. I mean, we all remember the week that the judge had ended early, and then she got an award from the Norfolk County Bar Association that same night. So she gave jurors a day off, she left early, and she went and collected an award. So this, there's a terminology that is thrown around by reporters a lot in Massachusetts, and it's hackorama, because these people are so tightly intertwined and linked, and their jobs and careers all depend upon one another. We see it here in Los Angeles as well. I think that for a lot of careers are riding on this case, and a lot of different prosecutions might be in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. But sometimes the jury sees that too. Sometimes the jury sees how skewed everything is towards the prosecution, and it helps the defense. So it could be a situation where the jury is going, look, this evidence doesn't make sense. Everyone's trying really, really hard to convict this woman, and there's something stinks here.
Admittedly, it's a lot more difficult to gauge the reaction of the jurors when you're watching the trial remotely. It's a lot easier to read the mood in the case, but it is worth noting that today there were thousands of supporters outside of the courtroom. And when Karen Reed left, they all very quietly made a heart sign that was returned by Alan Jackson.
They're the best.
Yeah, I think it was a good idea to have him out there.
Yeah. And I think Alessi one day, he came out and stood with the crowd out there and like clapped as Karen Reed and Alan Jackson were walking out, which I thought was very sweet and very...
We have not given that entire team enough credit. There was Robert Alessi. He's a New York City white shoe attorney. He did an amazing job. David Yannetti, I've watched him in action as a state prosecutor for the Boston District Attorney's Office. He was a Suffolk County DA, and he did a lot of homicide and gang cases. And then, of course, there's Elizabeth Little, who works with Alan Jackson here in Los Angeles. They really had kind of a dream team. On the other side, on the state side, they had hired Hank Brennan, who had, again, another tie to LA. He had been the defense attorney for James Whitey Bulger, the notorious Boston gangster who was a longtime FBI informant, who was given a tip-off that he was going to be indicted, and he fled to where? Santa Monica, where he just happened to luck into a very sweet run-controlled apartment. And that's where they captured him 14 years after he fled. So, there's a lot of history between Boston and LA and these cases, and how these worlds, these crime worlds continually collide.
Yeah, it's wild. Well, we'll see.
But
Very excited.
I'll be definitely keeping track of if there's any jury notes. That's what I'm most interested in. I just want to see a little bit of what's in their mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool.
Kimberly, Casper, Alexandra, Kazarian, you guys are two stellar attorneys that work for Garagos and Garagos. We really appreciate you coming on. We should note that Mark Garagos is the co-owner of Engine Vision Media. Engine Vision Media, of course, is the parent company of Los Angeles Magazine. So thank you both.
Absolutely. Anytime.